There is only one perfect solution, but there are clues that will try to trick our team.
Hello there, everyone. My name is Crazy Caleb, and welcome to Ill Logic. This is the way the module looks. It shows you a four-part Venn diagram. In this case, the A, B, C, and D. Of course, this is being A, it's being B. I did that in the wrong order, but we're going to ignore that for now. And of course, the O at the top. So, what this module is, it is a very tricky module to do. Now, at the top, what you can see here is you can see a bunch of gibberish that is correlating to the logic. This is correlating to different logic in the module, and it's going to be correlating to either, in this case, letters A, B, C, or D. It's going to be correlating to the different symbols of that logic, that the different operators that the module can give. And what's effectively happening here is this gibberish. It'll make sense once we figure out what each symbol actually means. And this is where things get a little bit tricky, and this module is arguably one of the trickiest modules that Speaking Evil has released. But it's a very fun one to do, and once this timer runs out, you're going to see exactly what we're going to be trying to look for here. So one of the things that you can do is you can shake it. Time drains faster when the device is rapidly moved, but in this case we're going to let it run out. And what's going to happen here is this is going to show us a series of results. If we input nothing into the module, it's going to show us which options are returning true and which ones are returning false, in this case marked by green and red respectively. So, and then what's going to happen here is it's going to generate a new sequence. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to note down this sequence. So I'm going to note down, this will be, I guess, the and symbol. This will be Charlie, Alpha, Victor. I'll mark this as equals, even though there's no such thing as 3-bar line, but equals is the closest thing to it. We've got this vertical bar here, and we've got Bravo. And what's going to happen here is this timer is going to run out, and this is going to show us the exact same results, and it's going to keep generating until you start inputting into the module. So in this case, you can change these things to mark them green, for example, and you can simply unmark them by selecting it again. And so long as the module is blank, what's going to happen here is it will just simply give us the answers. And what we can do now is we can actually speed up the time by rapidly shaking the bomb, and as you can see, the strip is going by faster. And in this case, we're going to get our results here, and let's see if we can get some good ones. Everything except O, A, B, B, C, and if you want to look for a reference over here, and we have an AD. So here, and here, unfortunately you can't highlight them, A, B, B, D, A, D, and O. So everything except for O, A, B, B, C, and AD was true. So in this case, we're going to leave this over to the side. So what we need to do now is, with these results that we get from each time, and we're going to need quite a few of them, just saying right now, with these results, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and decrypt what every single symbol means in this case. So we need to decrypt what all of these really, really mean. And this module actually, once you understand how it works, it's not that bad to do. So let's take a look at this long example here. So let's go equals Charlie, and I'm going to mark this as, I guess, I'll mark it as T for now, because that's triangle. Alpha Charlie, triangle, Bravo, open parentheses, caret, I guess, because it's an and symbol, and then we got left for left symbol. So let's shake this timer. Let's get the answer here. What would have been the results from this equation? You gotta shake it quite rapidly. And there's a lot here to note down. So we got O, B, C, it's quite complicated, A, B, C, A, B, D, B, C, D, A, C, D, and A, D. Quite an interesting sequence, and we probably won't be using that for reference, but this will give us an idea of how we can actually set up our equation, and we can actually figure out a couple things. First off, what we want to do is we want to figure out the symbols that are going to be limited to the letters, in this case, the Alpha, the Bravo, the Charlie, and the Delta. And the way that it's always going to be formatted is it's always going to be formatted in in several different ways. But we know for a fact that there will be some parentheses involved in some way, but it will always be some form of letter, then an operator, so like XOR for example, then another letter, and it will never be, for example, like Alpha, then Bravo, then XNOR and whatnot. That doesn't make sense. You're not evaluating anything. And I believe in every single statement there is going to be a occurrence of every single letter in order for that to be true. So this is going to be like one of the shortest ones, which probably means that there's no parentheses involved in this. So let's note down our sequence though real quick. So up, right, triangle equals VA, left, CP. And this will all make sense later on when we get down the road. But this will be a long tutorial, and I should note this down now. You should know most of these. I'm going to give you a basic rundown on how the logic works. But other than that, this is not the first mod you should be learning about logic for, that's for sure. Okay, so we've got, in this case, we have Bravo, we've got Alpha Charlie, we've got Charlie, we've got ABC, we've got ABD, BCD, ACD, and then CD. Bit out of order, but it's whatever. I need to make sure I get down the sequence right. And effectively what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be collecting a bunch of these sequences. I'd prefer if we can get a good starting point, something similar to where you just have to determine either the true cases or the false cases, and there's very limited amounts of them. But in due time. So equals, open paren, triangle, Bravo, U, left down, alpha. Let's shake the bomb rapidly. And as you can see, that timer is now decreasing super duper fast. Oh, everything except, here's another good one that we can do. Everything except O, B, and C. Okay. Except. That's quite a good. That's going to be quite a good starting sequence, and I'm probably going to be using this later on. This one also looks pretty good. Charlie Alpha. Bam, bam, bam. And at some point, what I'd like to look into is I'd first like to determine what the parentheses are. The parentheses are going to be the easiest thing to determine because even those have been randomized. So those are going to be probably a very good starting point for you. Then you're going to want to figure out which 4 characters are going to be the letters. So in this case, and then I'll give a breaking point, and then we're going to determine the rest of them being the operators. So once we get a couple more sequences, we'll be able to have a good look at them, good fine look, and we'll see what we can get here. Everything except a lot of Charlie cases. So ACC, ABC, BCD, ACD, CD. We'll organize this later, but for right now, this is the general idea. So, and we can probably get like 1 or 2 more. It generally takes quite a few reads in order to make sure that you get every single symbol involved because that's kind of important. Alpha left. So let's have a look. And one of the things that we can immediately start to notice is what we can figure out for the letters in this case is which characters appear every single time. All of Bravo and all B and AD. So that's a very interesting case. So Bravo being true the entirety of Bravo and then AD. So it's going to be a very interesting one to work with. But let's start looking at some of these things, and we'll come back to that later. But what we want to do is we want to figure out what our letters are. So we need to figure out what A, B, C, and D really are, or what they're limited to in this case, and then we can figure out going from there forward. So looking at the options we have here, and looking at this first one in particular, where there's definitely going to be no parentheses involved, what's going to happen here is this is going to be probably the case of letter, operator, letter, I guess I'm spelling out lol, operator, letter, operator, letter. And to check, what we can do is we can check if these 4 symbols that are corresponding to the letter appear in every single sequence. So we've got the caret, that does appear, that does appear, that does appear, it does appear, and there's a consistent pattern with that. Alpha does appear, does appear, does appear, yep, yep, and they're all appearing in positions that make sense in terms of the length of their sequence. In this case, this is the 3rd position, so there's an operator in between, that makes sense. There's an equal sign here, 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 and there's a Bravo, so it's going to be here, 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 and here. So these are going to be our characters that are going to be our letters. Now, we don't know necessarily what they equal, but let's write it out. So we got U, we got Alpha, we have, it was then the equal sign and the Bravo. Equals and Bravo. So I'm going to set them equals. And for right now, since we don't know what they are, I'm going to set them to A, B, C, D for each of them, just to make sure that we can know which is which. A, B, C, D. Which then, what we can do is we want to figure out the parentheses next. So the parentheses, in this case, just based off of the sequence alone, you know for a fact that there's going to be no parentheses, so we don't know. But these longer sequences are quite interesting, especially in cases where there are two letters that are there are two characters that are the exact same back to back, which likely means, and it actually does mean, that these are two closing parentheses, especially at the end. So we know for a fact that the left pointing arrow is going to be a closing parentheses. So in this case, L equals the closing parentheses. Now, what exactly is the opening parentheses? Well, what we can do is we can figure out which two spots would make sense. And in this sequence especially, if we take a look, there's two triangles, and they're at positions that would make sense. So if we do like letter operator, then opening parentheses, then a letter operator, then opening parentheses, then a letter operator, letter, close parentheses, something like that. And in this case, this would make sense. There happens to be the exact same position for triangles in the sequence that we got beforehand. So therefore, the triangles are going to be our opening parentheses. So that's how we can determine those. And those are the easiest parts to determine because you can get a sequence like this and you can immediately tell where they're at. So we've already determined two of our characters. That's a good start. Now what we want to do is we want to figure out what our letters could possibly be based on the sequence of characters. And we know for a fact that the operators, we can actually just start writing down some of these operators here. So we know our operators are going to be Charlie. We have a Victor in this case, which represents the or sign. I'm just writing it down because it's easy, and it doesn't allow me to copy and paste some of these because it gives me question marks for some of these guys. As you can see here, yeah, it doesn't support these amount of characters. It doesn't support this character. Then we have the vertical bar. Vertical bar is an operator. That's it for that one. I'm gonna get rid of that for right now. We said Charlie was an operator. That's a parentheses. We said Charlie was an operator. That's going to be an interesting sequence to work with because there's two of the exact same operator. Then there's another parentheses. The open parentheses is going to be another operator here. And then we got Romeo, so that's the right arrow. That's what I meant for that. I'm just trying to simplify it as much as I possibly can. That's the idea that I'm going for here. Equals is an operator. I believe we said that. No, equals is not an operator. I lied. Yeah, the triangle appears. Whoops. Yeah, the triangle, then the left. So we said V was an operator already. We said Charlie was an operator. So that might be just an operator that hasn't appeared yet. That's the triangle, and then the leftover arrow taken care of. The close parentheses is also an operator here, because if we look, it's the second symbol. Then the delta is an operator. It's basically just everything else that we haven't seen yet. So delta, we've got A, B, C, D. Then we've seen the triangle, we've seen the left arrow, we've seen the right arrow. So both the arrows here. We've seen the down arrow. We've seen the vertical bar. What am I forgetting here? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm missing one thing. There's one symbol that I'm missing, and I cannot seem to find it. Charlie, so let me just mark the operators off. So Charlie, so A, B, C, D, that's all of our letters. Oh, wait a minute. I think I noted down the down arrow instead of the delta. Where is the down arrow? I don't think I ever noted that down. So we might have to get rid of this sequence because I don't remember if it was a down arrow or not. I should have done that a little bit better. Oh god, what did I do for it? So, and then that's going to be the down arrow as well. I guess we can just call it like DA for it to make sense. I think this was a down arrow. I could be wrong, but I know for a fact that it's still an operator, so we'll come back to that. That's going to be an interesting point. So I'm sorry about that, but in this case, here is all of our operators that we have to work with. And what we know for a fact is now, we know for a fact that these are going to be the cases that we need to determine, and we need to determine our letters in order to enter in a logical solution into one of our options. I'm going to note down the sequence as well, because this is a fairly short one. So equals, right, alpha, open, U, and bravo. What do we get out of this one? I'm going to be quite curious and hopeful that it's a pretty decent sequence. Oh my god, everything except A, B, C, D. Okay. That's a very good sequence to work with. Cases where that you're only limited to one thing is going to be quite important. So everything except A, B, C, D is a very interesting case. So let's have a look at this. And now what we want to do is we want to start deciphering what could possibly lead this to be, in this case, true or false. It's going to be how we figure out things. And this one especially is an interesting case. So we know that this is going to be letter operator, letter operator, letter operator, letter. So we know that we're going to be using all of these at some given point. There's no parentheses that we have to worry about. So what could make it that that true and that if all of them were true, it would return false, and that would be the only case where that is the case. Let's find out. So it's definitely not and. It could be an and somewhere, but... And one other thing that's important to note is the way that it evaluates these submissions is going to be parentheses first, then from left to right. Operations inside of brackets are evaluated for operations outside of them, and then it goes from left to right. Be very careful with the way that you do these. It's very easy to get that messed up, but it's parentheses, then from left to right. So just be careful with that. So what could possibly cause this? At the end of the sequence, if all of them are true, and bear in mind they all have to be different operators too. These are all 3 different operators that we are working with here. So you might want to hold off on that for now. But this will be a good one to come back to once we figure out something later down the line. We kind of want to figure out some duplicate cases where there are very similar operators that are going to be appearing here. Operator. Something that doesn't make sense with that one. So I'm going to get rid of it. I must have noted something down wrong. Oh wait, no, there's a trying. Whoops. Yeah, letter operator, open parentheses, letter operator, letter operator. They're all basically, they're actually all the same operator. So what could cause that to be all of Bravo and AD to be true? Well, likely what it is since the parentheses starts here, what we can do is we can probably figure out, for starters, this is likely to be Bravo, because if Bravo is returning true, and it's just hanging out by itself, that could be a good case for me. Now, what I'm thinking of... That's an interesting one. I don't know what the operator could be, but there's going to be a series of, in this case, we're just going to assume that it's like Charlie, Alpha, and Delta, for example, just as simple placeholders for the time being. We don't know exactly what these operators are going to be, but what we need to do is we need to figure out what makes Alpha Delta true by itself, because that's just a very odd case to have, and what makes all of Bravo true. Now, my gut instinct is screaming for, and the way that this works, and I'm going to give you a basic rundown of logic now, and both of them have to be true. Both of the operators have to be true in order for it to return true, or one of the operators has to be true, exclusive or XOR in this case, exactly one of the operators has to return true. And the way that the implications work is the way that I like to think about it. If it's a true and the direction of the arrow is going to a false, that is false, and that's the only case that's ever going to be false. And it's the other way around for the other arrow. For you, if you were a true false, this would be false in this instance. That's the only way that these return false. It could potentially be a right arrow, but the Bravo itself is quite interesting. It doesn't make sense, because if Alpha Delta were true, in some specific case scenario, it would have to be true. It would be true going into a false, which doesn't make sense for the Alpha Delta to be true, whatever case would be inside of here. So in this case, I think it's safe to rule out this arrow. It wouldn't also be the right arrow, because of the fact that if it was true going into false, at some point Bravo would mess up. There wouldn't be a case where Bravo would appear, because there would be some sort of false that would return from this, I think. So, unless, if I think about it now, no, there is a possibility. There is definitely a possibility. If it was like true, true, and true, false, that would mess it up. So I don't think it's any of the right arrows. I don't think it's any of the right arrows whatsoever. It might be a NAND. It could potentially be a NAND. Because, no, it's not a NAND, because if Bravo were false, everything else would be true as well. It doesn't make sense. It's definitely not a NOR, so I'm going to start ruling some of these things out. And I don't think it's an XNOR. XNOR doesn't make sense because if this were to return false, you'd have some cases where that would return false. Which could mean it's potentially an exclusive OR. It's either an exclusive OR or it's an OR. But I still think that if it were an OR, something would have to make sense. And I don't think it's an AND either, so I think it's between XOR and OR. Which may mean that the alpha and the delta are like on the outside, for example. It makes sense that if all three of them were true and it was XOR, 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 that would technically return true, but that doesn't make sense. Oh, this one's quite nasty. Because remember, we're evaluating the parentheses first. And then whatever it returns with Bravo returns true. So, God, this is a really tricky one. Maybe it actually was one of the arrows, and I'm just thinking about it wrong because I forgot that the operations are evaluated before the parentheses. And as long as Bravo returns true, in this case if it were the left arrow, then what could happen here is, if it were the left arrow, as long as this returns true in any given instance, it's always going to return true. So in this case, the left arrow would actually make sense here. Now, this is actually important because the order is important as well for how we actually get it to be false, and the alpha delta still returns true. So we need to figure out how to make this return false with a specific order. So let's figure this out. So in this current position, if alpha delta were to return true, so Charlie being the one that is false, it would go alpha Charlie, false would return this to true. This would return it to true, that would return it to false. That doesn't work. Because remember, we're looking at this, and it needs to be a false in order for it to return true. So we need this to return false. So probably what happens is we need to maybe switch the Charlie and the alpha. So alpha returning true, true and true going to left to Charlie is a false, and then delta being true going to left from the result of the previous one going into a false would be false, and then false for a Lima going into a false with the Bravo returns true. So therefore, we know for a fact that Charlie is going to be equal to Bravo, and with this information what we can now do, so Bravo in this case is equal to Charlie. We know that for a fact. The up arrow is equal to Bravo. Bravo. And the we know for a fact that it's the equals and the alpha are limited to the delta and alpha. So we know for a fact that they're one of the two. We don't know the order quite yet because they are both interchangeable in this instance. And what we now know is that the close parentheses is now a left implication. So it's going left. So this is the close parentheses. We know for a fact that this is equal to L. In this case, we'll call it imp. So we've already determined one of the operators, and we've determined that this does add up to the result. I'm going to make a good space for this to show the work that we've done, but this is effectively what we're looking at here. And I'm sorry that I'm using one letters, but this is just a nice and easy way for me to remember things. So now, what we can now do is we can now use this information later on in the future to figure out what we're looking at here. So let's take a look and let's see exactly what we have here. So we know that this one is alpha or delta. At some given point, we know that this is either alpha delta or delta alpha. We don't know quite yet. We know that we don't know Romeo quite yet, so it's a question mark. We do know that alpha is delta, or delta alpha, so we know it's one of the two. We don't know the open parentheses. We do know the caret is Bravo, specifically Bravo. Then we know that this is a left implication for the close parentheses, and we know that Bravo is equal to Charlie. So we need to figure out these two operators here. What in a very specific case would alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, in this case everything returning true, how would it return false? So let's figure that out. So we know for a fact that the only case where left implication returning false is if the Charlie is true, so in this case the Charlie being true, and everything else before it being false. So that's going to be interesting to determine. And there's many possibilities that we can go down, but we know for a fact that this is going to be very limited, and it actually is quite interesting that this is the only case that actually does return false. So let's have a look. It's going to be stuff that's very exclusive, and I think we can eliminate a couple options here. So I don't think it's going to be XNOR or OR, because I think that would cause a little bit of problems for us. I don't think it's going to be XOR or it's going to be other implication. I don't think that would make sense. In this case, what we're effectively giving us options here is we are determining, and I'm marking this green because we've already determined it, it could be AND because of the fact that there's only one true operator and it's likely going to be involved in at least one of these 2 points. It's probably going to be involved in the first one if that's the case, because if we were to do an AND, or maybe not, I could be wrong. If we were to do a NAND though, NAND has only one false operation, and in this case it would be a if both were true in this case. What could potentially happen, and I'm actually thinking about this right now, is we could potentially apply an AND in here. In this case, that would return true, and we could apply a NAND in this case. So if we were to apply the vertical bar, what would this effectively do is delta and alpha are set to being true. And true returns as true. Bravo is set to being true. If true and true with NAND is the case, then this would make sense. There is also the possibility of doing a NOR and an AND. I'm going to mark this as DA, for example. I swear I have... mark it as L for now. No, we won't mark it as L for now. I guess I can substitute this for a 1, for example. That's like the closest thing to like a down arrow that isn't being used. So if the first operator were a NOR, it would automatically make it false. But the thing that's making me hesitant on this being a NOR is because of the fact that if we were trying to get something to be false in some specific point, there would be other cases where if even just one of these was to return true or false, it would still be acceptable. So we need the most exclusive answer and in the most exclusive order, and I think that this does the trick, because if we were to do, for example, if any of these were to be false, it would make this return true, which would then mess up the equation. So I think it has to be this. So in this case, if we get alpha or delta and that, and a NAND for that, so in this case, I believe that this is a NAND. For you, I'll mark this in parentheses, what it actually means. In this case, it's a vertical bar, and we said for the right arrow is going to be equal to this guy, which is an AND. So as you can see, this gets very tricky just from looking at it right now. I've been on this for half an hour now. But we've determined 3 of the operators, and I'm just making sure that I explain this thoroughly. But effectively speaking, we're just trying to figure out different types of patterns that would work for these. So we've already used 2 of these so far, and we've gotten pretty good. I think we've gotten really, really good results with this. What I would like to do now is I'd like to figure out the difference between D and A and D, because in this case, these are substitutable. These pretty much are interchangeable for right now. We don't quite know exactly what we're looking at, and we've determined our NAND and AND operators. So we still do not know these guys yet. We still have 5 operators left, but let's take a look and let's see what we can figure out here. So let's actually look at this first equation again, because we've determined, I think, some of these guys. We haven't determined Charlie yet. We haven't determined Victor yet. We have not determined the vertical bar yet either, so we'll come back to this one. But for now, I'll set up the equation. Maybe I won't. Let's start with this one, though, because this one has some options here. So let's take a look. So this is AD. We know that the close parentheses is a left arrow. The tango is the beginning of an open parentheses. The bravo we determined was a Charlie. I'm going to separate this from everyone else, just to make sure that we're able to see what's going on here. The open parentheses we determined was a NAM. The up arrow we determined was a bravo. The left we have not that's a close parentheses. Whoops. We do not know the down arrow, and we know that alpha is either alpha delta. Okay. Alpha or a delta. Okay, so we've already determined one of the operators. So we've already determined that we need to figure out which operator is which, and it's very specific cases that will make it return false. So let's have a look here. So anything inside of alpha is already going to return true. It could likely be an OR case, because that effectively gets rid of the whole thing. And since alpha is not included, it could be just OR, trying to figure out what's wrong with it. Oh, wait a minute, I did it wrong. I meant to do equals. Equals is alpha or delta. Oh, no, I'm right, okay. Okay, so, honestly, I think it might be an OR case. Because, well, no, that doesn't make sense. Let me think about this. It doesn't make sense for it to be an XOR case, because remember, we're evaluating this from left to right. Well, maybe it could be. If all of them were false, let's just assume the hypothetical, all of them were even false. I think let's start with that. So if this was false, false, this would return true. Notice that we're actually never, so the cases that do return false, actually, we're never going to have to worry about this ever being false in this case. So with every single time, this is effectively going to return to a true. And since we know that alpha or delta is not true in this case, what's going to happen here is this is going to be immediately evaluated to a false. So we know for a fact that this is going to be a false every single time, just based off of this sequence here. And now, with a false, false, how do we make this return false with the operators that we have left here? So a false, false has two possibilities. Well, if it was a NOR, in this case, they would return true. So we know for a fact that it's not a NOR. An OR would make sense here. An XOR would also make sense. I'll mark these as blue for right now. The implication would not make sense because a false false would return true, and the XNOR case would not make sense because it returns true. So we know for a fact that this one, this down arrow symbol, hypothetically speaking, because I forget if it was D or down, that I noted down, but I want to say it was down arrow. It's either an OR or an XOR. We don't quite know exactly which one it is quite yet, just from this information alone. And we still don't know alpha or delta yet, because the order is not relevant in this case. Either one of them can be effective here. So, yeah, that's at least that one figured out, so we've determined that. Let's have a look at this one, and let's see if we can determine anything new about this information. Potentially the order of things as well, because it looks like we have a lot of similar symbols that we've had beforehand. We still do not know what Charlie is, so we have to wait on that. This might be a good time to do it anyways, because it looks like we've had some symbols beforehand. So we've got the equal symbol. The equal symbol we determined was either alpha delta. We still don't know quite yet, alpha or delta. It might be time to get some new cases because these ones are not the greatest to work with. Alpha or delta, then Charlie. We don't know the operator for that yet. Alpha we determined was alpha delta. Okay, we still don't know that yet. Order might be relevant here. Then the close parentheses was what? It was a left implication. That was a bravo for the AND symbol. The close parentheses the open parentheses is a NAND, and then the bravo is of course the last case that we don't know, which is Charlie. So Interesting. Everything except Charlie, Alpha Charlie. Quite a lot of cases where Charlie is involved. So, what's probably happening here is, regardless of Bravo being present or not, in this case that only applies to a few of them, what's maybe happening here is this is always going to return false this is always going to return true every single time. And as long as Charlie is present, this is always going to be a true. So what we need to do is we need to figure out a case where this is going to return basically every single time. This is going to return true, minus the cases where Bravo is present, which in this case we would return, well, I guess they would return true anyways. A, B, C, B, C, D. It might be an XOR. Because if you look at it, what it's effectively doing is it's BC. It's always going to be BC. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. It might be an XOR. Honestly, it might be an XOR case. I think that might be the XOR that we're looking for here. Let me write it down. Let me think about this. So, every single time. So AD, is there a case where AD is both present? So yes, AD, in this case being true, we know for a fact that this is happening at some given point. If both of these are true, that's going to return to a false. False being implied, left implied from the Bravo, false and false makes that true, and then true and true with the Charlie would be false. I think this is an XOR. Because what happens is that even with Bravo still present, that still returns as true. I'm just trying to think. And the cases where Bravo isn't present, there would still be the option to give a false case. Because if Bravo returns true and this returns false, that's going to mess up the entire thing. So I think that Charlie has to be an XOR. And we determined that XOR was this, so we now know for a fact that the down arrow is an OR. So that's perfect. So we've already determined a lot of these. So we're very close to being done. So now what we simply need to do is determine the last three operators, which I have not seen at the moment. And what we can do now is, I believe we've had a couple of these beforehand, but if we look, actually, what we can now do is we can now determine the victor here. So let's go, it's Bravo for this one, and I believe hopefully this will help with the order too. We said Charlie was an XOR, which in this case, XOR is the triangle. The Alpha Delta, we don't know quite yet. I'm going to mark that as a question mark for right now, just to make sure that I remember that. We don't know this operator. We do know that it equals is, of course, the Alpha Delta case. I'm going to mark these as AD, for example, down here. We know that the not symbol, we actually don't know the not symbol. And we know that Bravo is a Charlie. Okay, so this first one is interesting. Except O, AB, BC, and AD. Okay, so all of them being false makes it not true. So let's figure this out. It might be an XNOR for that last case, because that XNOR being at the end would be interesting. So we know that we're going to have to work with two of these last three operators at some given point. Don't know exactly which ones yet. I don't think it's the NOR at the end, and there's a reason why I'm thinking about this, is because of the fact that NOR is very specific. It's very specific. And I think that if there was a NOR case at the end, because remember we're evaluating from left to right, the NOR case would have a lot more cases where it would return false. But of course I could be wrong. I'm gonna just change this for right now. I'm gonna do AD. For my sake, A, D. So there's an XOR case. So there's an XOR case with Alpha Delta. I guess we can just try. At this point, we can just probably enforce it. So if this was NOR, for example, and this was an, I guess, an XNOR, because these are probably the most restrictive cases. So let's try and start plugging this stuff in. So in this case, if A, B is true, let's hope it's this, and then false, false in this case. So true, true with XOR is going to be returning false. False, false with NOR is going to be returning true. And then true, false with XNOR is going to be returning false, okay? Then with Bravo Charlie, so let's assume that this is alpha, and let's assume that this is a delta, for example, hopefully. Then with Bravo Charlie, so we've got true, and then false, false, and here. So true, false with an XOR is true. Anything with NOR being immediately true is a false. And then a false true with an XNOR returns false. Okay? And alpha delta being, in this case, true. And then Bravo Charlie being false. Assuming that this is the correct order, of course, because order is very important here. False true makes that true. Anything with true makes it true. And then anything with... No. Okay, so here's where this thing gets messed up. The alpha delta case. Or excuse me, the Bravo Charlie. Or no, yeah, it is the alpha delta case. So if we do false true with an XOR, that returns true. True, true in a NOR returns a false. False, false with an XNOR returns a true. We do not want a true because they're both the exact same. That's not it. What if we were to swap the order of these, though? Let's go XNOR and NOR. Have a look. My gut instinct is telling me that's probably not the case. It might be XNOR and a left implication. This one is quite hard to tell. I don't think it's NOR at the end. It might be like it might be the implication. It might be imp. So what would have to happen is this would have to be a true and this would have to be a false. That doesn't make sense. So actually, this can't be implication. That actually is easy to determine there. This cannot be implication because of the fact that if the Charlie were to return true, it would automatically return true at the end. That's regardless. So that we know for a fact that this is not implication. So that means, by default, we know for a fact that this symbol is not implication. So let's maybe put the imp here, and let's put the XNOR there. Let's give that a try, and let's see what we can do. So let's try the other cases. So let's try all of them being false. Okay, so false, false in an XOR is false. False being the first, and an imp makes it true. True, false in an XOR makes that true. So that first one's good. Then alpha, bravo being true. Okay, true, true in an XOR case makes that false. False, false in an imp case makes that true. True, false in an XNOR case makes that false. Excuse me. So that's good. So Bravo Charlie, then true, false, false, true. True, false is a true. Then true, false in an imp case is actually a false, and then false, true in an XNOR is a false. That's good. Then alpha delta for our final case here. So false, true, true, false. So false, true in a XOR case is true. True, true in an implication case is true. And then true, false in an XNOR case is false. This makes sense. So we know for a fact that imp is the victor case. So the victor is an imp. So it's the right arrow in this case, as I'd like to call it. Right arrow. And we know for a fact that the vertical bar, or the NAND in this case, is an XNOR. And that leaves us, by default, and I'd like to make sure of this because I might have messed up the D or the down arrow. In this case, that leaves us with only one option left. D is equal to NOR. That makes sense. And I believe we figured out that alpha is actually equal to alpha itself, and this is equal to delta. I could be wrong in this, and I'd like to make sure of that before we continue on, because this has been going on for quite some time. I'm going to get a screenshot of that one real quick, because that's quite an interesting one. It does have a down arrow in it, so that's actually quite interesting. So let's have a look at this one. So in this case, if we were to do these substitutions, I'm actually going to write this one over here. So in this case, Bravo is a Charlie, down arrow is an OR, alpha is alpha, or in parentheses, the equal sign is a delta, the close parentheses is a left implication, the and symbol is a Bravo, and then that's a close parentheses. So I'm gonna space these out just for the sake of spacing them out. The only case where this would return false is if it were just Bravo. And let's check that. If it were just Bravo, left implication, true going to a false is false, and that makes sense. So now we know for a fact that the down arrow was indeed OR. I did note that down right, so that's perfect. Okay. Alright. That is a pretty good confirmation there. We still don't know alpha or delta being correct, but I'm going to assume that is correct. I'd like one more quick confirmation. This one might be a good one right here. Hopefully. Oh, wow. Okay. Let's have a look at this one. Yeah, they're really giving me the cases that I kind of needed beforehand. But we have, in this case, Bravo, or the alpha being alpha, and then delta being NOR. Then the equals being delta. Of course, they're right next to each other. It wouldn't matter because I know for a fact that if going from left to right, it doesn't make sense. Then you're an XNOR and then Bravo. And the only case where this is false is if everything is false. So in this case, false, 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 false. Bravo or alpha, in this case, that returns false. False nor false is true, and that lines up. Yep. That is a good confirmation of my operators. I still don't know if delta or alpha are the exact same. So this potentially determine it for me. So now let's assume that we hypothetically have determined our operators here. What we now need to do is we now know everything that we need to know about each of the swaps that have been made, each of the substitutions, I guess is probably a better word, that have been made for each sequence. And what we need to now do is we now need to evaluate an operator and actually submit its answer for it before the timer runs out. Now, I would recommend getting an easy one. I would have preferred to have gotten that last one, but of course, you know, stranger things can happen. And actually, I want to evaluate this one to make sure because this one looks like order is important for alpha and delta here. So let's see what we have here. So if hypothetically we assume that this is the correct option here, so we've got Bravo equals Charlie, Charlie is equal to XOR. Triangle is in open parentheses. We have, in this case, is delta, and that's a that's an XNOR. XNOR, what's that symbol? XNOR isn't equals, so I'm just going to mark that as an equals right now. Then another open parentheses, then alpha is equal to alpha. Then a right arrow is an and. And then the vertical bar is a Bravo, and then two close parentheses. So the only cases where this is true are Oscar, all of them being false. Okay, I'll have a look. Let's try delta being true. So let's go false, true, false, false. I said this was an XNOR. Okay, so that's... Huh. Delta... Oh, excuse me, Charlie Delta for that last one, not Delta just by itself. So Charlie Delta would make sense in this case. Still would make sense anyways. If Alpha were to return true. If Oscar, if Alpha Bravo. Ooh, yeah, here we go. So if Alpha Bravo were to return true, so in this case false, false, true, true. True, and true in this case. Yes, here we go. So true and true, since we're looking at this parentheses first, true and true would make this true. true, XNOR false would make that false, and then false XOR false would make that false. So this means the order needs to be swapped for these two. So this is equal to alpha, this is equal to delta. Very glad I checked this, because if we do this all over again with these two in a swap position, true, false, true. If you can already see, wait a minute. True, false. How is alpha bravo true in this case? Hold on a minute, did I do something wrong here? So bravo equals Charlie. Charlie equals XOR. Then parentheses. The equals alpha, which what we assume anyways. The vertical bar is an XNOR. Another parentheses. Then alpha we assume is delta. Then the right arrow is an and. Then the vertical, then the V, and then the that's a bravo. Close parentheses, close parentheses. How is alpha bravo true in this case? Am I a moron? Hold on. I think I might be a moron. Hold on. What the hell? Hold on. I'm gonna get another example, because I need to make sure that I got these right. I could have been doing this wrong. I might have been doing this wrong this entire time. Oh, this sucks. Okay, well, hopefully order is relevant here, and gives me some comfort. Alpha left implies triangle. Okay, the order is relevant here. It's going to be quite nice. Then a delta, then an XOR. I wrote noted down triangle for no reason. And a bravo. And an XOR. Then that's going to be the last option, is just Charlie. Okay, order will be relevant. So, okay. A, B. We do true, false, true, false. False, true, true, and then true, false. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Just delta. Just delta. Okay, something doesn't make sense here. Actually, the entirety of delta is true, so I'm just going to mark that as it's delta, then alpha. So I was right beforehand. God damn it. Alpha and delta. I must have messed up my logic somewhere. So AB. Oh, yeah, AB would throw it off. That would throw it off. Okay, yeah, I think that confirms my answer. All right, so now what we want to do is okay, I'm confident with this now. I had my answer right beforehand. I'm just a moron. So now what we want to do is let's translate a sequence here, and let's get this answer inputted into the module. So let's have a look here. Okay, so we've got hopefully a pretty easy one. Bravo, or we've got open parentheses. Bravo is equal to Charlie. Down arrow is an or. Okay, that's got quite a few ors. Alpha is equal to alpha. It's equal to itself. The left arrow is a closed parentheses, and then we got open is a NAND. Oh Jesus. Okay, and we got the equal sign is equal to delta. Okay. So everything outside of delta is true, because if there's at least one false with the delta here, we know for a fact that that's good. Just delta would work, because if at least one of these is true, I think that that's it. Yeah, because if it's anything with delta other and it's one more thing, that would make sense, because if bravo or, that's automatically going to make anything true. If it's bravo delta, yes, I think this is the right answer. This would make sense. Now let's shake this time to submit it into the module.
That is
And
absolutely
just
right.
like that is a solved module. Sorry for that little bit at the end there. That was a little bit tricky for me um, to explain, but that is effectively how this module works. It's very tricky to do it, but you kind of just have to work your way around it, and you have to make it work. But yeah, easiest part is determining the parentheses, then the letters is quite easy, but the operators themselves are quite interesting to work with. You want to get answers where there's very limited options. That's the best to work with, in my opinion. Um, I, as I said, I didn't use these at all. These were never relevant to me. These were just relevant for getting the parentheses figured out. Is not that hard to do. So that's all there is to it. Thank you guys for watching. It's good to be back. It's good to be doing this again. And as always, stay crazy, stay cool, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.